Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1416, Qianpeng Holy City. Certain that Han Li was a Qianpeng being, Xianxia didn't hide his plans and calmly said, "Regardless if it is true, we'd best quickly return to our clan. The Kai Rong clan was able to attack us once. They could try again. With your grand powers, I fear we'll need to rely on your strength." The other two looked at Han Li with expectant eyes. Han Li's abilities had been truly powerful. If they had a clan member of such vast power, they didn't need to worry about the path ahead of them. Han Li muttered to himself for a moment and answered, "All right. Since I'm most likely a Qianpeng being, it is only natural for me to provide my fellow beings with some strength." Since this would grant him a good opportunity to enter the Qian Rong clan, he definitely wouldn't refuse. Xianxia repeatedly thanked him and said, "We'll have to trouble you. After we return, I will certainly report your merit to our elders." The other two smiled in response. When Han Li heard the word merit, he appeared indifferent. When he looked at the blue net surrounding them, he smiled and said, "Let's not linger here any longer. I'll get rid of the devil trapping net." With that said, Han Li pointed to the net in the distance, and the silver firebird that was circling him immediately let out a melodic ring before shooting towards the net in a ball of flame. A light pop sounded and the silver flame directly struck the blue net, immediately creating a person-sized hole. Afterwards, silver flame quickly spread through the net. The huge blue net was destroyed in the span of several breaths as it turned to ash underneath the grey flames. Under the spirit engulfing flames, the net burned like paper. The three Qianpeng beings blankly stared at the scene. When they saw this, they viewed Han Li's abilities with even greater importance. "All right, let's go." With that said, Han Li formed an incantation gesture and silver flames condensed into a ball, forming back into a firebird. It then vanished into his body without a trace. The party of four then set off over the horizon. For some unknown reason to the three Qianpeng beings, Han Li remained in human form, so the three hadn't transformed into their bird form either. They simply crossed the sky in balls of silver light. Han Li was greatly interested in the flying spirit tribe's ability to change forms, but he didn't rashly pursue the topic. He simply used the excuse of having always cultivated overseas to indirectly inquire about the Flying Spirit Tribe and the Qianpeng clan. These matters weren't a secret, so Xianxia and the two readily answered him. As such, not only did Han Li come to understand much about the Flying Spirit Tribe and the Qianpeng clan, but he also came to know that the younger two in the party were brother and sister, an elder brother named by Lei and a younger sister named by Ning. Of course, the three Qianpeng beings also asked Han Li a few questions, but Han Li always answered that he rarely encountered others because of his dedicated and secluded cultivation. Seeing that Han Li was unwilling to divulge this information, Xianxia and the others were unwilling to pursue the topic. To them, it was enough that Han Li was a Qianpeng being. Afterwards, Xianxia brought Han Li across a land of hills, then flying across grasslands and several forests, before arriving at an endless mountain range. This had taken place over the span of a month. During this time, they hadn't encountered any more Kai Rong beings, but they did come across many low-grade Qianpeng beings. However, it was a pity that these members seemed ignorant of any internal clan happenings. As such, Xianxia and the two felt somewhat relieved. It seemed that the Kai Rong beings' words were false. Even if the higher echelon of the Qianpeng race sealed off this information, that meant they could preserve order over their clan. Once they entered the mountain range, they began encountering Qianpeng beings in far greater number. There were those flying in both their bird and human forms. Han Li took note that although the shape and style of their wings were completely the same, the color would often be different. Most Qianpeng beings had azure and white wings, while others would have silver wings like the three in his party. There were even those with gold and black wings. However, these Qianpeng beings were very rare. He only saw two of each on their journey. Those with the three majority colors didn't have anything special about them, but those with the two rarer colors were entirely different. Despite the lower cultivation of the golden-winged Qianpeng being, Feng Xiao and the other two appeared very respectful and took the initiative to greet them. As for the two black-winged beings, the three wore stiff expressions. They simply ignored them as they flew past. The two black-winged beings also had lesser cultivation to the party. Han Li took notice of this and found it strange. But from his experience, this likely had something to do with a taboo in the clan. It wasn't something that he could carelessly inquire about. As a result, 3 days after he entered the mountain range, they eventually came across a Qianpeng patrol squad. The patrol consisted of about 30 members and flew forward to meet them. They all wore white bone armor and held a silver-long spear. From their aura, they appeared to be at foundation establishment and core formation stage. But in case of a patrol squad, they could be considered an elite group. The middle-aged man in charge quickly saluted with a smile as soon as he spotted Feng Xiao. "Greetings, Spirit Feng and Lords Bai. Under the Elder's command, you three are to report to the Myriad Peng Pavilion as soon as you return." "Yi! Who is this lord?" As soon as this was said, he looked at Han Li with an odd expression. Feng Xiao's expression changed when he heard this. He then promptly introduced Han Li. "This is Brother Han. He's cultivated overseas and has returned to the clan. Brother Han, no need to feel awkward. We'll introduce you to the elders. You should take a rest at the Holy Mountain first. Given your abilities, the elders will definitely see you." Han Li indifferently replied, "It's nothing. Since this is my first time back in the clan, I plan on taking a look alone. Brother Feng should hurry on." After a moment of thought, Feng Xiao gave a wooden plate over to Han Li. "Our holy city is majestic. I fear you'll have to spend much time to become familiar with it. Here is my command token. Apart from a few restricted areas, you'll be able to take a look at the rest of the city without anyone blocking you." He turned around with a sullen expression and commanded the middle-aged Qianpeng being, "Send someone to personally guide Brother Han. He is an honored guest." As you bid, Feng Xiao clearly held a high position in the clan from the core formation grade patrol leader's response. "Brother Feng, you're quite considerate," Han Li said with a smile. Feng Xiao regretfully replied, "How? In truth, this is actually quite lacking. When the time comes, I'll personally guide you through the holy city." Soon after, the three in his party saluted Han Li and turned into large silver birds before shooting off. As soon as Feng Xiao flew off, the middle-aged Qianpeng being waved his hand at his subordinates and pointed at a 19-year-old man, commanding, "Who are you? Bring this lord to the lodge. You must properly attend to him." The man with a scholarly appearance immediately bowed and agreed. Soon after, the middle-aged man uttered a few words and bowed to Han Li. The rest of them then continued the patrol. Under the guidance of the young man "Who are you?" they headed deeper into the mountain range. The young man spoke to Han Li with the utmost respect and didn't speak unless answering Han Li's questions. But as a meager foundation establishment grade being, he didn't know many important matters. He could only give Han Li curt responses. After following this person for several hours, they arrived in front of a dozen small mountains lined up in a row. These small mountains had black clouds covering them and sparked with lightning. They continuously boomed and were difficult to see through. Han Li narrowed his eyes at the sight. With his exceptional attainments in restrictions, he promptly saw through the dark clouds. They were clearly a formidable illusion restriction. As expected, Who are you brought Han Li up to one of the small mountains. He then unfolded his wings to reveal white feathers and flew into a space inside the small mountain. A muffled bang sounded. A small mountain twisted as if it were only an illusion in the water. With several shakes, the small mountain disappeared with a ripple, only to reveal a huge passage of fog. The youth flew in without any hesitation. Han Li raised his brow but followed after him in an azure streak. After flying for a kilometer, his surroundings lit up around him. He saw a giant city that seemingly had no end. The city was carved out of mountains and had city walls constructed from huge white bricks. The city walls only appeared to be 60 meters in length, but they were surrounded by giant verdant mountains. The walls had no gate, but they had a dense white barrier covering them. There were over a dozen places in the wall that had giant straight pillars erected. The pillars shined rainbow and emitted a faint light. As of current, there were many Qian Peng beings that were flying through the gap in the pillars to enter the city. Chapter 1417. Spirit Seal Tower. The Qian Peng youth Hua Yu waited for Han Li to take in the huge city and said, "Sir, please follow me." Han Li nodded and unfolded the wings on his back. Then he followed the youth to the closest pillar. On the way, the youth took the initiative to explain, "My lord should be careful not to stray far from the heavenly pillars. The gaps in the city barrier only span 150 kilometers around the pillars. The city's Qian Peng restrictions are famous among the 72 races of the Flying Spirit tribe. With these restrictions alone, we can withstand enemies that outnumber us several-fold. Since ancient times, the city restrictions have allowed us to escape extermination time and again." The youth spoke with a tone of pride. Although Han Li didn't examine the city's restrictions, the fearsome spiritual pressure of the barrier made him feel the youth's words were true. After a blue light flashed wildly from Han Li's eyes, he began to notice a few remarkable areas. Deep in the glaring white light above them, he could faintly see floating silver and azure threads of light. They appeared exceptionally thin, but most of the fearsome spiritual power the barrier was emitting seemed to be coming from these threads. Han Li took several deep looks at them before following the youth past the side of a huge pillar. A short moment later, the two appeared inside the huge city. At a glance, the various buildings in the city greatly differed from human buildings. The city buildings were all in the shape of cylinders with conical roofs. Their heights all varied, with the tallest of them reaching over 300 meters in height, while small ones were only 10 meters tall. However, the reach of the buildings had several semicircle arched doors and windows. What particularly surprised Han Li was that nearly half of the buildings were constructed out of mountain cliffs. There were even caves built out of steep mountain walls that resembled a beehive. The youth respectfully said, "Sir, the honored guest lodges are spread throughout various areas of the city. Would you like to stay at the closest one? It should be empty." "It makes no difference. Let's do as you say," Han Li answered indifferently. "Yes." The youth uttered a word of acknowledgement and led Han Li at a low altitude, allowing him to take on the many sights in the city. They also brushed past many winged men and women. 2 hours later, they arrived at a large group of buildings and landed on a platform nearby. The platform was connected to a circular 3-story building. When the two dropped down, 2 young women with white wings rushed out and saluted them. "So it was Big Brother Hua Yu. Will this lord be staying at the honored guest lodge?" When Hua Yu recognized the maid, he solemnly said, "Bai Kui, this is Lord Han. He is an honored guest of Spirit Feng Xiao. Attend to him properly." A trace of astonishment appeared on her dainty face and she respectfully answered, "A guest of Spirit Feng Xiao? I will definitely treat this lord well." Han Li took a glance at the young woman and noticed that her weak aura was Qi condensation grade. He simply nodded and walked into the building. The young woman lowered her head and closely followed after him. Hua Yu didn't dare to enter and simply waited outside for the time being. A moment later, Han Li's voice sounded from inside, "This place is to my liking. You may leave." The youth felt some relief and uttered a word of farewell before flying off. On the 3rd floor of the building, Han Li was standing behind a semicircle window and narrowed his eyes as he watched the youth slowly depart. The maid named Bai Kui was standing 10 meters behind him in a helpless manner. Without turning his head, Han Li uttered, "How many people are there in the holy city?" After a pause of surprise, the woman hastily answered, "The holy city is extremely large. Although there haven't been detailed accounts, there are at least 40 million people." 40 million? That few? Han Li uttered with a tone of doubt. The woman hastily explained, "Only those that can cultivate to the point they can take spirit form can enter the city. The clansmen that have lesser cultivation and can't transform don't have the qualifications to enter. Although we are one of the weaker branches of the Flying Spirit tribe, we still total over 1 billion in number." So it was like that, Han Li said with a tone of realization. She stole a glance at Han Li and hesitated for a moment before asking, "My lord, is this your first time in the holy city? Are there many honored guests like me that have entered the holy city for the first time?" Han Li indifferently asked. The woman carefully explained, "My lord must be joking. Very few people check into the honored guest lodge in the first place, and if they aren't outer tribesmen that checked in for the first time, they are outer tribesmen that have come to the holy city on business. There is nothing to be surprised about. This is my first time returning to the clan. I've always cultivated overseas," Han Li calmly said. He then asked, "Are there any maps of the holy city on sale? If there is, tell me where and I'll buy one." The maid respectfully said, "There is no need for my lord to head outside and buy a map. There is a particular map that is prepared for the honored guests that reside in the lodge. Its detail is far beyond what is sold." Han Li felt surprised, but he promptly commanded, "Oh? That is very good. Go ahead and give me one." "Yes, my lord." The maid took 2 steps back and swiftly went downstairs. Han Li stood in his original place by the window and began to ponder about his plans moving forward. He wanted to infiltrate the Qian Peng race so that he could acquire the rare materials that the Flying Spirit tribe had. As for their treasures and tools, Han Li hadn't given them much thought. Although he only saw a battle involving the Flying Spirit tribe, they didn't seem to rely on treasures and tools too much in combat. It was unknown if they were skilled in tool refinement, or if the high-grade existences in the Flying Spirit tribe didn't draw assistance on common tools. The grand treasures like the Devil Trapping Net and the Fire Dragon Pearl only seemed to have an auxiliary nature. However, these still didn't catch much of his interest. So long as he could acquire some useful materials, the trip here would have been worth it. As for the quarrel between the Qian Peng and the other branches of the Flying Spirit tribe, he had no interest in involving himself. While Han Li mulled over these thoughts, the maid returned to the 3rd floor with an emerald green bamboo tube that was only several inches long. Despite its size, a luster glinted from its surface. Feeling somewhat shocked, Han Li promptly reached out to the tube that was offered to him. In a gust of wind, a green streak shot out and arrived in his hand. Afterwards, he waved his arm at her and she promptly descended after a swift salute. Alone, Han Li fiddled with the bamboo tube in his hand with great interest. He then sank his spiritual sense into it and saw a huge man clearly etched on the interior of the tube. The tube was mostly similar to a jade slip, but it was still quite peculiar to produce something similar to a jade slip with refined bamboo. It appeared the Flying Spirit tribe wasn't lacking in tool refinement and had their own uniqueness. In any case, Han Li's spiritual sense quickly focused on the tube's interior and concentrated on the image of the map. In the time it took to finish a meal, he let out a sigh and withdrew his spiritual sense from the tube entirely before wearing a pensive expression. The holy city was a bit smaller than he expected. It was comparable to a human city that housed 100 million people. In any case, the city was still astonishingly large. It would take most of a day to fly from one end of the city to another. Han Li wasn't very interested in buildings apart from the largest trading hall in the city. The hall was constructed on a huge mountain at the side of the city. The mountain was where people traded items. It was about the same as a human or demon market. Apart from this building, Han Li was also curious in a place called the Spirit Transmit Hall. It was where the Qian Peng Hall specialized in supplying a few high-grade cultivation arts to their clansmen. The map also marked a few forbidden areas. Han Li took note of them and had no interest in pursuing them further. He then closed his eyes and committed various parts of the map to memory. After going through the information once more, he unfolded his wings and wrapped himself in azure light. He then silently flew out the window directly towards the large trade hall. The Qian Peng race wasn't in a stable situation. He was unwilling to stay in this place for more than half a month. It'd be best if he gathered the materials he needed and left as soon as he could to save himself from being involved in anything troublesome. However, Han Li didn't wish to attract too much attention, so he flew at a slower speed that matched other Qian Peng beings in the city. Because the trading hall was located at the edge of the city, Han Li only traveled halfway in a quarter hour. At that moment, he spotted a huge tower not far from his front. It was over 2 kilometers tall and it wasn't a commonly seen cylinder. It appeared to be in the shape of an octagon with each side appearing flat and smooth apart from a few particular talisman designs on each side. These designs emitted a faint black chi that gained Han Li an familiar feeling. The top of the tower had several 3-meter-tall crystals that emitted 7-colored light that covered the tower. The black chi was trapped in the rainbow light barrier, preventing it from escaping. Han Li stroked his chin in surprise. If he remembered correctly, the tower should be a forbidden area in the city. It was the so-called Spirit Seal Tower and was given no description. There wasn't a single Qianpeng being that dared to fly 300 meters within range of the tower. Chapter 14:18. The Qianpeng Holy Disciple and Kuanpeng True Blood. Black infernal mist. A familiar thought flashed through Han Li's mind. The black mist that the stone tower emitted was the strange mist that enveloped half of the peninsula he stayed at. However, the mist from the tower was extremely thin, as if it were being strictly controlled. Han Li felt somewhat alarmed, but since this was a restricted area of the Qianpeng race, he wasn't about to provoke anything. As everyone else did, he flew around the tower. But as Han Li brushed past the tower, he felt an aura from the tower surge, causing his body to quiver as a cold sensation covered his back. This is... Han Li stopped and turned to stare at the huge tower. He simply saw the huge tower continue to emit black infernal mist. At an unknown time, the mist had become denser, with the tower's talisman marks occasionally flickering with rainbow light. It wasn't able to completely block the black chi from rushing it. Fortunately, the rainbow barrier emitted from the top of the tower completely blocked the black chi from leaving the vicinity of the tower. But a short moment later, the black chi caused the 7-colored light barrier to tremble violently, as if it could collapse at any moment. When the nearby Qianpeng beings saw this, they were all dumbstruck and stopped in shock. They all stared at the strange occurrence occurring at the Spirit Tower. Han Li then sensed his wings tremble and turned burning hot, creating a scalding pain on his back. Han Li's expression vastly changed. At that moment, an incredibly high-pitched shriek whistled from the tower. When the nearby Qianpeng beings heard this, they began to close their eyes and fall from the sky. Although Han Li wasn't as negatively affected, he still felt his spiritual sense become dazed as his burning hot wings immediately lost effect, causing his body to sway. Fortunately, he could still fly without any reliance on the thunderstorm wings. His body promptly flashed with azure light and he steadied himself. Then he looked at the huge tower with horror. A huge explosion boomed and the crystals on the top of the tower brightly shined, causing the rainbow light barrier to shine as well. At that same moment, overlapping cryptic chants sounded out from the tower, as if over 100 people were chanting a similar incantation simultaneously. The Qianpeng beings that originally fell then glowed with spiritual light, floating up in the air as a layer of 7-colored light surrounded them. However, the tower released another piercing shriek and the dense black chi inside began to roil, forming a kilometer-tall huge bird phantom. The hollow figure appeared faintly black. It unfolded its wings to cover the top of the half of the tower and let out a long shriek, causing the black mist to surge several times in size. The surrounding rainbow barrier began to violently warp, exerting a huge pressure. At that moment, the other Qianpeng beings covered in rainbow light began to shake but otherwise appeared fine. In their fear, however, they began to scatter in every direction. Han Li originally thought to immediately fly away, but as soon as the huge black bird phantom appeared, his wings trembled. Suddenly, a huge azure bird phantom appeared from a tremble of his wings. It raised its head and cawed in response to the black bird. Meanwhile, the nearby air became tense and he felt his body grow heavy, suddenly incapable of movement. In his fright, Han Li emitted brilliant golden light from his body, exerting immense power in his limbs in an attempt to break free. But what immediately caused his heart to sink was, in spite of his body's immense force, he felt the air surrounding him had become as dense as metal. He wasn't able to even move his finger. Han Li's thoughts quickly churned. Just as he thought of using a true devil projection to break free, the incantations coming from the tower changed and became far more clear. The incantation also faintly sounded with booming wind and thunder. Soon after, the strange talisman characters began to appear in the air near the tower and began to float in the black bird's direction. As this went on, the huge crystals on the top of the tower ruptured. A ring of 7-colored suns slowly floated into the air, releasing a brilliant light that covered the black bird phantom. With the brilliant seven-colored light and the talisman characters restricting the black bird phantom, the phantom could only shriek as it helplessly dispersed. To the side, the huge azure bird phantom also vanished. Han Li felt relief at having regained control of his body, but he felt quite bewildered. Apart from the difference in size and color, the shape from the azure bird phantom and the black hollow phantom appeared exactly the same, like a legendary Kuan Peng. Could it be a Kuan Peng was sealed in the tower? As Han Li pondered with shock, he immediately thought to flee from the scene. But when he swept his sights around him, he wryly laughed and decided to stay still. This was because there were a dozen balls of light that had emerged from the huge tower. In a few flashes, they arrived 100 meters away from him. At this distance, he could clearly see Qianpeng beings through the remaining lights. If he fled now, he would be marking himself as guilty. As he pondered, he decided to wait and see what they would say. He quickly swept his sights past the lights and found 2 late deity transformation grade beings inside of them. The others were only early and mid-stage beings. Feeling a bit of dread, Han Li didn't dare to provoke them and remained still in the air. With several gusts of wind, the dozen beings unfolded their wings and arrived before Han Li in the blink of an eye, surrounding and staring at him. Of the 2 old men in charge, one of them had a pair of white wings, while the other had wings that were faintly gold. One of them also had a kindly face while the other appeared stern, but like all the others, they were firmly staring at Han Li with an odd look. Although Han Li didn't truly fear the Qianpeng beings, he felt somewhat apprehensive at this current situation. He forced a smile and asked, "May I ask why you've surrounded me?" Greatly against his expectations, the white-winged old man respectfully asked, "Brother, what is your esteemed name? Your face is quite unfamiliar. Are you kin that has recently entered the holy city?" With a few quick thoughts, Han Li answered, "My surname is Han. I've cultivated overseas and have only entered the city today." Seeing that the Qianpeng beings didn't reveal any hostile intentions, he decided to give an answer. "You're from overseas? And you only entered the city today?" Han Li's answer greatly shocked the old men, but they soon exchanged a glance and wore an expression of joy. The stern old man solemnly said, "Good, very good. Regardless of where Brother Han came from, your Qianpeng Qi is quite abundant to provoke the Kungpeng spirit in the tower. You could receive the title of Holy Disciple and inherit the Kuan Peng True Blood." The Qianpeng True Blood. Han Li was shocked. If it was before, Han Li wouldn't have understood what they meant, but with the True Dragon and Heavenly Phoenix True Blood in his bracelet, he realized how rare this item was. Han Li was startled that such fortune had appeared before him. But with another thought, Han Li felt lacking in confidence. He wasn't truly a Qianpeng being. How could he become their holy disciple? Under closer inspection, his disguise would be revealed. He wouldn't inherit any true blood, but would be provoking the hatred and ire of countless Qianpeng beings. Han Li dryly chuckled and shook his head. "You've made a mistake. I come from an ordinary background. How would I have the qualifications to inherit the true blood? It wasn't me who provoked the scene at the tower." The gold-winged old man seemed to ignore Han Li's words and smiled, saying, "There is no need for Brother Han to shirk this away. A true spirit projection had appeared from your body. Those of us from the tower had clearly seen it. We weren't mistaken. Brother Han must see the elders. Being able to become a holy disciple is a matter of the utmost importance." Han Li inwardly cursed and looked around. He saw the Qianpeng beings looking at him with excitement and determination. "I truly am not any holy disciple. It's fine if you don't believe me. However, I have important matters to attend to, so I must bid farewell." Han Li resolved himself and quickly uttered a few words before vanishing in a blur. He flapped his wings, wanting to use his abilities to fly a distance away, but at that moment, he heard a woman's voice. "Outsider, wait. Do you truly plan to leave? If you do, hand over your wings to us." The voice wasn't loud but soft and sweet. When Han Li heard it, he felt as if his spiritual sense shook with astonishing thunder and his face turned unsightly. As soon as those words were uttered, a nearby space fluctuated and a slender figure silently appeared 10 meters above him. It was a white-robed woman with golden wings. Han Li stared at her and felt his blood run cold. She had an ordinary appearance, but a glistening light was roaming across her body. From her aura, he felt that her cultivation was unfathomably deep. She was a mid-stage body integration-grade presence. Han Li widely opened his eyes. "We pay our respects to the Grand Elder." The deity transformation-grade Qian Peng beings respectfully saluted the young woman as soon as she appeared. This woman was actually the Qian Peng race's Grand Elder. Han Li felt his mouth dry up. The woman calmly commanded, "Let me deal with this person. You should return to the tower and strengthen the seal, pacifying the holy Kuan Peng spirit in turn." "As you command." As a clear display of their respect, they immediately followed their orders and returned. The young woman then turned her sights on Han Li. Chapter 1419. The Grand Elder. Chapter 1419. Grand Elder. A bright glint shined from the young woman's eyes and she casually said, "This isn't the place to talk. Follow me." She then turned around and slowly flew off. Han Li's expression wavered for a moment, but he decided to honestly follow her. Facing a fearsome existence like a mid-body integration stage being and finding him in the holy city of a foreign race, Han Li didn't have any opportunity to escape. And when she hadn't turned hostile, he could only comply with her words. The young woman appeared calm like a gentle wind, as if she didn't possess an ounce of anger, but she flew at an immense speed. Han Li had to use a majority of his strength to follow her. He couldn't help but feel overwhelmed as he forcefully stifled his wandering thoughts. After flying for the time it took to finish a meal, the young woman brought Han Li to a solitary cylindrical building that was 100 meters tall. "I pay my respects to the Grand Elder." Two young dainty Qian Peng women walked out from the entrance and wore respectful faces. The young gold-winged woman nodded and walked inside. Han Li closely followed after her into the building, discovering that the interior was more simple than he had expected. Apart from a stone table and a few stone chairs, there was nothing else. The young woman waved her hand and the two maids withdrew. Then, she took a seat and faintly moved her lips, uttering, "Sit down. I have questions to ask." "How could I take a seat in front of Xianxia?" "I will listen to you with complete attention," Han Li calmly said. "Do as you wish," the woman indifferently replied. Han Li then remained standing stiff and straight. After a moment of thought, she asked, "Are you a human cultivator?" Startled by her question, Han Li carefully asked, "You've visited humans before?" With fluent human language, she said, "Of course, I've even visited one of your three sovereigns, the Spirit Sovereign. I held his superb attainments in puppet techniques in great admiration. In truth, there have been many powerful existences in the Flying Spirit tribe that have visited the humans. With regards to the friendly relations between our races, I will answer your questions. But I will expect you to answer my questions as well. Otherwise," when Han Li heard her threat, his calm expression broke for just a moment. "How did Xianxia see through my disguise? Regardless of anything else, I've refined my thunderstorm wings to completion. I've even altered its aura with secret techniques to match your kin. So long as something on Xianxia's level doesn't touch me or examine my true essence, they shouldn't be able to discover anything wrong. Otherwise, I wouldn't have dared to enter the clan." This question had left him perplexed. The young woman smiled and answered, "Your transformation is entirely complete. The Kuan Peng Qi on your body allowed you to pass through the holy city's grand restriction undetected. If you encountered the other elders in the clan, you would most likely pass them by if they didn't undergo a deliberate examination. However, I am different. As the Grand Elder, I wield the holy artifact, the symbol of power in the clan. Our Qian Peng's holy artifact can see through all illusions and directly peer into your body's true essence. No matter how impressive your illusions may be, they are no use against me." Han Li suddenly came to a realization, but he soon felt extremely gloomy. Han Li wryly laughed, "You mean, if I went to the other branches of your tribe, I wouldn't have been discovered?" The young woman smirked and indirectly answered, "Of the 72 branches, only the Yu Shui race's holy artifact has a similar ability." Han Li grew silent for a moment. He eventually asked, What does the Holy Disciple and the Kunpeng true blood have to do with what is sealed in the Spirit Seal Tower? The young woman explained, the Spirit Seal Tower contains the lesser half of a Kunpeng true ancestor's holy soul, which was gathered at astronomical cost during our Golden Age. By relying on the Holy Soul's power, our Qianpeng race was able to persist until today, but there is no need for you to know the specifics. As for the matter regarding the Holy Disciple, it is quite simple. It is the general title within the tribe for those with the potential to inherit true blood. If a Holy Disciple is truly capable of inheriting the holy true blood of a race and passes a trial, they could become the race's holy master. Han Li didn't reveal any surprise when he heard this. He had already guessed as much. He was even disinclined to pursue the topic of the Holy Master any further. The young woman blinked and asked, "It seems you have no other questions for me, so it should be my turn. The wings on your back should have been refined by something from a Kunpeng. It caused the Holy Spirit to struggle free of the Spirit Seal Tower. This is something that rarely occurred since the creation of the tower." Han Li frowned and truthfully answered, "It wasn't anything much. I only refined a remnant fragment of a Kunpeng feather." The young woman doubtfully said, "Kunpeng feather? That can't be. Even if it was a complete Kunpeng feather, it shouldn't have provoked the Holy Spirit to such a degree. I'm not sure about this myself." Han Li shook his head, also confused over the matter. After muttering to herself, she indifferently said, "Hand over the winged treasure over to me for inspection." Han Li's heart sank, but when he met her bright jewel-like eyes, he only hesitated for a second before shaking his shoulder. In a flash of white light, the wings disappeared, only for them to reappear in miniature size in his hands. Han Li raised his hand and presented the small crystalline wings to her. Han Li's unexpected forwardness had surprised the Grand Elder. She looked at Han Li's serene face for a long while and eventually took the wings with a smile. While nothing odd appeared on his face, he could only wry laugh in his mind. If he weren't facing a mid-body integration grade existence, he would have refined the wings into his mind. Even if he was forcibly detained, he'd most likely be able to still use the wings' spatial abilities and directly summon them back. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have given them over. The young woman held the thunderstorm wings in hand and closely examined them for a short moment. A curious expression soon appeared on her face. She flicked her finger and sent the wings back in Han Li's direction. Relieved, Han Li had the wings silently disappear in a flash of white light and momentarily reappear on his back. The young woman appeared indifferent at the sight and slowly asked, "In truth, not only do the wings have the true ancestor Kunpeng feather, but it also has the feature of the heavenly phoenix. I have a rough understanding of how this came to be, but I'd like to hear how you acquired the Kunpeng feather." Han Li was surprised when he heard this, but he didn't conceal anything and described the battle he witnessed between the Kunpeng and the Rahu at the realm boundary. When the young woman finished listening, she appeared pensive. A moment later, she examined Han Li once more and said, "Brother Han, would you be interested in entering our Qianpeng race and becoming our holy disciple?" Han Li was dumbfounded. Han Li blinked and asked, "Did I hear correctly? Does Senior wish for me to join your race?" "That's right. I have a plan in mind, but the matter is incredibly important. I'll need to discuss the matter with the other elders." Han Li went silent for a moment and eventually noted, "But I am a human, not a true Qianpeng being." "So you still don't know. Normally, Kunpeng feathers and other Kunpeng items are left behind from deceased Kunpeng. However, the feather you have refined was an item left behind from a living Kunpeng true ancestor. The feather contains an aura several times stronger than an ordinary Kunpeng feather. In addition, this feather most likely contains blood essence that you haven't yet perceived. Since our Qianpeng race had been the descendants of a Kunpeng true ancestor and you've refined the Kunpeng item, you may have refined the Kunpeng blood into your body as well. It wouldn't be mistaken to consider you our kin." Her words left Han Li at an even greater loss. A short moment later, Han Li woke up from his amazement and he looked at the young woman with narrowed eyes. He laughed and said, "I heard that your Qianpeng race's current holy master has already perished, and now there is no one in your race that can inherit the Kunpeng true blood. It is also said that the Flying Spirit tribe is possibly removing your race from the 72 branches. Could this be true?" "How do you know about that?" The young woman's face slightly changed and the image of a golden bird appeared behind her. The phantom simply unfolded its wings, but Han Li felt an immense pressure on his shoulder, and he soon heard his bones begin to crack. With a thud, Han Li's legs sank a half-foot deep in the stone floor. Han Li's complexion also turned incredibly pale. But at that moment, the young woman frowned and the bird phantom disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the young woman restored her calm and said, "I don't know how you came across this information, but I hope you'll keep it secret for the time being. I don't wish for the holy city to fall into chaos. Also, there is a mistake in your words. We do have 2 holy disciples that can inherit the true ancestor blood that we've kept concealed. However, their cultivation is still too low to succeed in the trial placed by the various races. That is why I've invited you to join our clan." After shifting his eyes, a thought quickly went through his mind and he smiled. The Grand Elder means that I'll be standing in the 2 holy disciples' place as their protector. Chapter 1420. The Trade Hall. The young woman calmly said, "That's right. Although you do have the qualifications to join our Qian Peng race, you are a human after all. Even if you pass through the trial, it is impossible for you to become our race's holy master. However, fellow Daoist Han can provide support to the other 2 holy disciples as a fellow holy disciple and help them pass the trial. If you agree, I won't treat you unfairly. Not only can you fuse a bit of Kuan Peng true blood into you, but we'll thank you in other ways as well." Such fortune would cause an ordinary person to rejoice and promptly agree, but Han Li simply blinked and didn't immediately answer. The young woman didn't urge him and simply remained seated as she stared at him. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Han Li eventually said, "For the matter of being a holy disciple, Senior would have an outsider like me enter your race. The trial must be quite dangerous. Could you first give me an explanation?" It is true the trial is quite dangerous. The various races' disciples have a 60 to 70% chance of failure and injury. Furthermore, the holy disciples' cultivation must be at the level of a flying spirit general, what is known to you humans as the deity transformation stage. But now, our holy master has unexpectedly perished, and our holy disciples are only early spirit general stage. They still aren't prepared. If they attempt the trial, they will most likely fail. Although I don't know much about your abilities, since you were able to cross most of the Feng Yuan continent over here, your strength should be significant. Even with the danger in the trial, it shouldn't be a problem for you." Han Li's eyes stirred and he solemnly asked, "They are only at the stage of a spirit general." "Don't worry, I won't trick you." The young woman smiled. With a moment of thought, Han Li eventually said, "I'll need some time to consider it." The young woman appeared calm as if having expected this answer. "The matter is extremely important, so consideration is expected. How about this? I'll give you 3 days before I expect your answer. During this time, you are free to roam the city and no one will come to bother you. Furthermore, I'm named Jin Yu. Remember that name." Han Li uttered a word of thanks and bid farewell without any hesitation. When Han Li left, he blurred and vanished without a trace. Jin Yu smiled and sipped the teacup that was on the table. "Grand Elder, did you truly release him?" Grey light flashed from the wall and 2 Qian Peng beings appeared. Jin Yu glanced at a tall red-bearded old man and asked, "What? How did you think I'd treat that person?" The lofty red-bearded old man rubbed his hands and said, "There is no need for us to pass off the foreign being as our holy disciple. Wouldn't it be better to force him to leave behind the wings and select someone better to inherit the true blood?" The young woman sneered and bluntly answered, "If it were that easy, why would I go through the trouble of saying that to a foreign being? I would just kill him and take the wings away." The petite beautiful woman standing at the old man's side hastily fixed her jacket and respectfully said, "Then the Grand Elder means—" Jin Yu pondered for a moment and explained, "I hold the most understanding of humans among the entirety of the Qian Peng. The humans are different from us in which their body's powers are common and most of their abilities lie in the treasures they've refined. Furthermore, they can temper their treasures for long periods and thoroughly refine them with themselves. We can take it away and possess it, but it will be difficult to rid the treasure of the original master's markings in a short amount of time. Furthermore, the treasure's might will greatly decrease from when it was used by its original owner. I've already inspected the treasure to verify this. With the information I have and the trial of the holy disciple soon being imminent, we don't have the time to seize his treasure and bestow it to our kin. The red-bearded old man shook his head. So it was like that. But even so, must we hand over the true ancestor's blood to this outsider? This isn't some small matter. A clear glint shined from the young woman's eyes. Elder Shu, are you confused? If our race doesn't pass the trial of the holy disciple, the entire race will be absorbed by the other branches. Giving him some true blood is minor in comparison. Besides, we can consider other options to prevent this from happening. The dainty middle-aged woman was startled for a moment and smiled. The Grand Elder's words are reasonable. After this outsider helps us through this calamity, this spirit general-grade existence will be completely at our mercy. Jin Yu coldly glanced at the beautiful woman and emotionlessly said, "We cannot kill him. Even if he is a foreign being, his fused Kuan Peng true blood into his body and can be considered half our kin. Our Qian Peng vows will restrict us. Furthermore, he will be our benefactor if he truly aids us through calamity. If it isn't necessary, we mustn't harm him, but we'll be able to restrict him in other ways. From now on, he won't be able to leave the holy city." The red-bearded old man said, "So that's the case. Should we inform the gatekeepers or send people to follow the outsider in secret to keep him from escaping?" Jin Yu aloofly said, "There is no need for Elder Shu to worry. I've performed a small trick on his wings. If he wants to escape the city, I'll immediately know about it." The beautiful woman's eyes brightly lit up and she grinned. "It seems we've been worrying too much." "That isn't so. Our clan has 5 Grand Elders and only 3 of us are in the present. The matter concerning our clan's existence is something that we must deliberate. I wouldn't have secretly called you over here otherwise. Do either of you have any objections?" "No, the Grand Elder's method is reliable." Both the beautiful woman and the old man readily agreed. The young woman nodded in response. From the very beginning, none of the 3 Qian Peng elders had even considered that Han Li would refuse. This came as no surprise. After all, Han Li was only a deity transformation grade outsider. How could he refuse their request? At that moment, hundreds of kilometers away, Han Li was flying at a low altitude. Although his expression was ordinary and he appeared at the various buildings below him with interest, he was inwardly pondering about his dilemma. He had carelessly exposed his identity and found himself in a bad situation. With his rich experience, he figured that no matter if he completed the young woman's request, the result definitely wouldn't be good for him. A bold refusal definitely wouldn't be possible. As for immediately escaping, the thought had already surfaced in his mind several times. But after he swept his spiritual sense past his wings, he could only wryly laugh. The Qian Peng Grand Elder had brazenly placed a marking on the wings. Within a certain area, she'd be able to find him without a doubt. And he wouldn't be able to erase the mark at his current cultivation. At the very least, he'd need to spend many days. The Grand Elder could find him countless times during the duration. It appeared his only option would be to negotiate a few conditions to protect himself. Otherwise, it'd be better to take the risk to flee than to become the holy disciple of foreign race. As for the conditions, he would properly deliberate them once he understood the general circumstances surrounding the Qian Peng race. Fortunately, he's already encountered danger countless times and managed to keep calm even under such a dilemma. As Han Li slowly flew, thoughts quickly flickered through his mind. After some time, Han Li arrived at a lofty bookstore in the holy city. He spent an entire day looking through a small half of the books there before departing with a tired expression. When he returned to his residence, Han Li shut himself in the honored guest lodge until the morning of the 3rd day. He departed with his objective being the large trade hall that he wanted to go from the very start. He hadn't encountered any trouble along the way. As Han Li flew, he eventually arrived at the edge of the holy city and stood in front of a strangely constructed building. The building was constructed next to a 3-kilometer-tall mountain cliff, and in the cliff, a huge rectangular plaza was carved out of it. At the end of the plaza, there was a 300-meter-tall arched gate embedded on top of the mountain wall. To either side of the arch, a dozen armed guards were standing in formation. Between them, countless Qianpeng beings rushed to and fro the gate. Han Li simply examined them from a distance for a moment. Then, his wings stirred and he flew among them in a ball of azure light. A guard in front of the gate noticed Han Li. His expression faintly changed before he gave Han Li a deep salute. Han Li nodded to him and boldly walked through. He walked through and saw the space before him brightly light up. There seemed to be an entirely different world past the gate. At a glance, he saw long passages that seemingly had no end. There were also lines to lofty buildings that appeared to be walls. Under closer examination, the halls seemed to have over 10 stores, with each story being 100 meters tall. And every 300 meters in width, there would be a 30-meter tall hall entrance. Countless Qianpeng beings were flying back and forth, up and down. It appeared this was where the Qianpeng race traded.